Welcome back. The world is waiting for the Zimbabwe elections outcome with great anticipation, whilst Lesotho faces a tentative future as the country battles to form a sustainable government. And South Africa has appointed the former Deputy Chief Justice Dikgang Moseneke to mediate in that country. Several other countries in the SADC region, including South Africa, Mozambique and Botswana, will be having their national elections soon. There is a possibility of new governments emerging, and this has implications for the economies of the region. We look at the relationship between politics and economics in the SADC region, and I'm joined by Amnesty International Southern Africa Regional Director Dupros Muchena, and welcome, as well as Open Society Initiative for Southern Africa Deputy Director Tiseke Kasambala. A pleasure to have you with us, ma'am.
Thank you.
And welcome. I just spoke to Brian Kagoro a short while ago. We were talking about Zimbabwe and the United Nations expressing concerns about the integrity of those elections. But one thing that cannot be taken away from the Zimbabweans is the fact that they definitely are looking forward to taking part in the elections and thus leading to the formation of a new government. But what are you hearing? What are you seeing in Zimbabwe currently? What's going on in terms of the freeness or fairness of the elections? Second.
Well, you know, the same questions and concerns that have plagued Zimbabwe's previous elections are plaguing them now, in particular around the integrity of the electoral process itself. There are serious concerns around the impartiality and the independence of the Zimbabwe Electoral Commission in terms of both the composition of the commission itself and its conduct and the way it's running the electoral process and the way it's administering the electoral process. And I think until those issues are settled, there will be questions over the freeness and fairness of this election.
Right. And any concerns on the human rights front, political parties being allowed to move freely or people being intimidated?
Well, for us, the election itself represents an opportunity to break with a past of gross human rights violations in the run-up to elections, a past of impunity, and a past of closure of space. You know, just give you an example that, you know, you have in the media space absolute dominance of the Zimbabwe Broadcasting Corporation, whose sole mandate is to promote one candidate. You have a Broadcasting Services Act enacted in 2001 to license community radio stations, among other things, no license given. So the space for free expression at the lower level is absent. People are now relying on social media and other things that they use for communication. So the space for expressing rights is limited, and Zimbabweans are getting by. So we are losing an opportunity to really decisively break with the past. That's our concerns. There are also concerns related to the conduct and content of manifestos, which seem to lack any sort of focus on the impunity of the past in Zimbabwe and forced disappearance issues of people like Itai Dzamara, questions of forced evictions of communities in urban areas, Zimbabwe's failure to abide by regional norms and standards, and finally the absence of any kind of focus on women's rights, especially adolescent girls who continue to be on the receiving end of violations of health rights. So the content, the conversation itself is not putting human rights first. So we fear that in the post-election environment, human rights might also be missing. That's why we launched that manifesto, to remind opposition.
Sure, and of course there will always be a drive, I suppose, that it has to be intensified to promote human rights, even in the new environment that is expected to emerge in Zimbabwe. But Zimbabwe is not the only one with the elections, right? A whole number of countries in the region will be having elections, including South Africa, as I said. But the DRC has had its own problems. Maybe it's a question of distance between South Africa and the DRC, but it is an area of concern, isn't it, when it comes to democratic elections? If you can tell me more about the developments there.
Yes, I think the DRC is a serious concern for the region and for us at the Open Society Initiative for Southern Africa, where we have seen President Kabila attempt to change the constitution so that he would remain in power and run for the next elections. The situation right now is that there is a drive to ensure that he does not run for the elections that are coming up in December, that he remains committed to stepping down and allowing those elections to proceed. However, Kabila himself and those around him have been very reluctant to come out and say that Kabila is not running for these elections, which is highly problematic. But we have seen Angola and SADC making it clear that they expect these elections to go ahead and that they expect President Kabila himself to step down and allow for a new candidate from his political party to run in these elections. And this is the hope, because as you know, the DRC has always and has gone through a lot in the past, a lot of instability. And Kabila's attempt to run in this election is likely to destabilize the region, the Congo itself, plus the broader region. So,
but then you know, an argument can be made that that's the wish, that he steps down. Has he given any indications that he will not be taking part in the elections?
Well, all signs are that he has made commitments behind the scenes to not only leaders within the Congo around him, but also behind the scenes to SADC and other interlocutors. The South African government, the Angolans have all been mediating this process and attempting to convince him not to run during this election. So what we're hoping is that he will stick by those commitments. But he has not made any public statements to that effect. And that's a serious concern. And also what we've seen is the authorities in the DRC trying to really repress and restrict political movements and restrict freedom of expression in the country, with youth groups in particular who have been advocating against Kabila's running in the elections coming under particular attack from the security forces, arrests and killings. And that remains a concern ahead of the elections.
Well, in fact, there is a particular attack on judges.
Yeah.
Yes.
Judge Mbui was visited after he had rejected an order directing him to find Moise Katumbi guilty. And at night, he was visited by 8 armed men. 4 bullets were put in his body, if not more. He had to be flown here for treatment and battled for his life. Was in coma for 4 months. And other judges are also being intimidated. So it's not just an attack on freedom of expression and free speech for civil society groups, but also on institutions of government, so that they comply with a particular political trajectory that the government would like to see. And I think SADC really needs to speak out and not do behind the scenes diplomacy, because it doesn't achieve protection of citizens.
Indeed.
But SADC is dealing with so many issues, and SADC is made up of the very countries that are expressing or experiencing the political challenges that we are discussing now. I mean, when you look at the whole membership, probably what, a third or 50% of them are somehow in some political difficulties, isn't it? I mean, I'm thinking here of, for instance, Lesotho as an example. And in the South African context, the politics in Lesotho taken for granted that somehow the politics there will match the politics in South Africa. But that's not really the case, as we saw with the appointment of the former Deputy Chief Justice Likgang Moseneke to mediate there. Let's hear what he's got to say.
Everybody thinks that I'll be able to add value. And I think we should continue to try and find appropriate solutions. I'm humbled by the appointment. I make no promises at this stage, but we have to find peace, stability, proper governance, hopefully constitutional changes that Basotho themselves would want to see happening.
But why is it difficult then for Lesotho to form a government? I mean, the elections have been held, coalition government formed, the next thing there's floor crossing, this happens, that happens. Just to your mind, off the top of your head, what do you regard as the main issues in Lesotho?
Well, I think one of the biggest issues is security sector reform in Lesotho. We have seen the security establishment, in particular the Lesotho Defense Forces, being involved in the political day-to-day runnings of government in Lesotho. We have seen them forming alliances with the political parties in Lesotho. That is hugely problematic and has led to a lot of instability in that country. And I think the main thing is for the security forces to return back to barracks, to ensure that they're no longer involved in the political dispensation in Lesotho. That would be one way of solving it. But also we're talking about constitutional reforms here. When you talked about floor crossing, Lesotho's form of proportional representation is problematic, and it's led to the kind of political chaos we've seen in the country at the moment and the ongoing political instability. So I think SADC as a community has put in place various reforms that it would like to happen in Lesotho, and also reforms of state institutions, the judiciary, and the respect for the independence of the judiciary. All these things need to happen for political stability in that country.
Yeah, for me, one of the big problems in Lesotho is the culture of impunity. that obtains in the kingdom. When a particular violation or crimes are committed, they never really get investigated, concluded, and come up with a decision that deters future conduct of that nature. So you still have the case of Maparango Mahau has not been concluded, and it's one of the bigger issues that Tiseke Kasambala is talking about on security sector reform. You have Lloyd Mtungamiri, a journalist who was editor of Lesotho Times, shot at in 2016. The case has not been concluded, not even investigated. Well, case of Motobody is the same thing. She had to flee to South Africa because she was being haunted by security forces and threatened with her life.
But you know, as we discuss all of these issues, and the incidents are many, I appreciate that we could deal with all of them. I just want to hear your comments regarding the influence, the role of economics, business in the region. Can it play any influential stabilizing role? For instance, in the case of Lesotho, South Africa using that as leverage to bring about the reforms that you were talking about, and the conduct of the businesses in the region anyway, majority of them coming from South Africa. Brief comment from yourselves.
Well, very briefly for me, I think the problem with business and economic interests and the way they have panned out in the region has been that it's not been for the benefit of the citizens of the region. It's been for the benefit of the political elite, including in places like Lesotho. And governments such as South Africa have not done enough to deal with issues of corruption, malfeasance, and political jostling for personal gain, which also is afflicting South African politics as well. And until we start to address those issues, the economy will not work for the benefit of citizens. And I think that's the main issue from my perspective.
From my perspective, I mean, business in Southern Africa is failing to provide the necessary leadership to transform our regions into inclusive economies, where the triple burden across each country of the region of poverty, unemployment, and inequality is decisively dealt with. The patterns of inequality we see at company level reproduce themselves at national level as a result of the nature of economies that we are running. And in Lesotho is no different. Extractive industries there that operate there in the diamond mining area are not doing sufficiently enough to transform the proceeds of mining proceeds into human development. You have a big project, for example, which is run by Netcare from South Africa, of the refurbishment of a big major hospital in Lesotho, which was financed by the International Finance Corporation at 100 million. But what's now happening with the hospital is introduction of user fees, which is creating panic for poor Basotho people who can no longer get treatment there, so they get transferred into Bloemfontein. And then they're now owing South Africa 800 million, which is gaining interest. So our business community is not linked to a regional integration agenda. I think our business communities are linked to own interests of primitive accumulation. And that is undermining the prospects of business playing a transformative role. So we hope that SADC states and leaders can begin to fashion a new regional integration strategy, like industrialization, which can
and therefore the business partnership with the political elites, one could say, is somewhat responsible for so many challenges that we see here. And therefore, it's the change of mindset that should happen, at least at the top within the private sector and the political sector. And thanks very much for having been my guests. I appreciate your insights. And thanks very much. That's the Amnesty International Southern Africa Regional Director, Diprose Muchena, as well as Open Society Initiative for Southern Africa Deputy Director, Tiseke Kasambala. Thank you again. Until next time, and we want to thank you for having been part of the Mudise Network. We invite you to be with us again next week, Saturday at 6 p.m. Good night to you.